This is
Kwami Abdul-Bey.
also a co-convenor of both the APJMM and Washington Foothills Youth Media Arts and Literacy Collective. We are excited to be here. We are honored to be here. And we thank you so very much for this very, very important documentary and this panel discussion and affording us this time to be with you and talk with you about what's next, and also a little bit about the film. Before I really get started, or we really get started in this, I want to take at least about 20 seconds to um, have a moment of silence for Mr. Scott Green. Um, Treopia let us know that he passed April of 2020 from COVID complications, COVID-19. And so I want us to all take a moment of silence to honor and respect the life of Mr. Scott Green, and also all of the souls who have passed away from this very awful pandemic that has have taken the lives of so many people in 2020 and also in this year. So within that moment of silence, let's think on their lives and what they brought to the world, uh, what Scott brought to the world, and also what we want to see in the world.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I want to let all of our viewers that are on OV know that you are permitted to have your questions answered. All you have to do is put them in the chat box. We are reading the chat box, so anytime you have anything that you would like to comment on or to ask a question of a panelist, definitely put it in the chat box, and provided that we're able to get to those comments and questions, we will definitely do that. Now, we have, okay, Treopia is no longer, where did she go?
She's still with us, I think.
All right, I'm gonna put this on gallery so that we can all be seen. She's not with us now. Hopefully she'll call back. All right, let's go ahead and introduce everyone. First and foremost, I want to introduce Treopia Washington. She was on the phone. She has some computer problems. It looks like she fell off, so hopefully she'll be calling back in shortly. We also have Scott Simpson and Sharla Steever, who are the filmmakers of this particular project. And finally, we have Robin White, who is the superintendent of the Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site. And I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to say hello and say hello. Scott, why don't you go first, please?
And whatever else.
Wait a minute, do you see Robin laughing at me?
I'm glad to see Robin laugh. I haven't seen Robin face to face, and still aren't seeing her. But it's been such a long while. We communicated a little bit. It's so good to see you, Robin. I just want to tell you, thank you for being here. Thank you for having us this film. It's so important. It's been a work of love for about 3 years, if not more, if you want to count the pre-work before that. And we're so honored to be able to work with Treopia and Ernest and Scott and Robin to get their story out, because it has never been more important than it is right now, I think.
Yes. Thank you.
And Sharla?
Thank you. It's so good to be with you. Thank you for sharing this film. It's really an honor to have it shared on this platform and with all of you. I'm very thankful for being here this evening and for the opportunity. I am humbled and honored by this opportunity. I have been friends with Treopia for about 15 years now and have heard her stories many times, and just there's so much that we can learn and grow from knowing these stories. And so I'm really honored to be here and look forward to any questions that we might be able to answer. This was truly, like Scott said, it was a work of love. It has been nothing but honor and wonderful to work on. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharla.
And Robin, please, okay.
There she is.
Yeah, let her talk. I'm gonna, okay. We have Treopia. She's back with us.
Okay.
Treopia?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
ma'am.
can. We're just going through introductions, and we'd like to give you an opportunity to say hello to all of the viewers.
Well, good afternoon. You're in my very favorite place, my birthplace, Little Rock, Arkansas. And I apologize for not being able to see you, but you know, sometimes technology is not our friend.
Yes, we know that.
Yes, that is well known. And Robin, would you like to go ahead and say hello to everyone, please? Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, this project has been a labor of love, and it's been a long, slow process, and I really enjoyed all of us just engaging each other, talking with each other, bouncing ideas. But another documentary, and I want to share this with you. We talked about culture, and a saying in my culture is from our Queen Quet, you must take care of the root for the yield the tree. So I would encourage everyone to look at that documentary with the song, the music, and talking about just sustaining our culture. I'm Creole and Gullah Geechee, and so the saying comes from that part of my family, that part of my culture. And I called Queen Quet and told her that we were using a quote, and she was really excited about it. So here we are.
Indeed.
But I really encourage people to look at that, the music documentary as well.
Indeed. And I really appreciate the fact that you opened up with the emphasis on culture, because the documentary opened up with that same emphasis. And I definitely want to start our conversation with you guys explaining to me what happened with this project that you were doing with the video statements of the elders. Tell us about that project.
Yeah, I'll start out. So Sharla and I have been doing this work really in a sense of education with schools for really about 10 years in both South Dakota and North Dakota. Elders from all the indigenous nations in our region have written essential understandings, and thankfully the schools, the public schools, have said those need to be used in all of our schools. The challenge is probably in our two states, I would say 90 to 95% of all teachers are white. They're not indigenous. They're not people of color. And so we have white folks who are being called upon to introduce these cultural pieces into their classroom. The elders invited us to get involved with that, to find ways to help them understand how to do it, first of all, but also the key piece of that is if I'm a white teacher and I'm bringing in something that's indigenous culture, a Lakota culture, let's say, a big piece of respect is letting my students know I may teach English. I'm an expert maybe in English. I may be an expert in learning. I will never be an expert in Lakota culture. I'm pointing my students toward the experts, the Lakota elders, the Lakota culture teachers. And that's the key piece of this that's respectful. So what we've tried to do in the documentary with Treopia's guidance especially is to say, we're educators, we're learners, we know some things about some things, but we want to point you to the experts on this. And that would be the Green siblings. We want to point you to them, and we want to try to help you to connect with that in meaningful ways.
And Sharla, what are these essential understandings that, I mean, just the name of it is so beautiful to me. Essential understanding. You get right down to the core, the basics. What are they?
Yes, they are beautiful. So in South Dakota, back in 2011, they were adopted in our state, and we have a group of elders in our state, Lakota elders, who came together and said, these are the most important things that we want our children to know about ourselves, but our neighbors to know about us as well. And so they wrote 7 understandings that are 7 kind of different topic areas, things about the land and the environment and relationship, kinship, storytelling, history, all sorts of things about treaties, all sorts of things that are very important for us to know as South Dakotans. We need to know about our neighbors. We need to know about the people who have lived here longest, but not only know about, we need to learn from and gain that knowledge directly from them. And so when we help teachers work with those and bring them into their classrooms, it's transformative. It helps to break down barriers. It helps us to understand one another in a way that, you know, maybe we don't do well otherwise. When you sit and you listen to a Lakota elder tell a story or share about his or her culture, and then you suddenly are sort of drawn in by, oh, that's like when my grandpa did this other thing. I connect with that, and on a very human level, we're able to make connections that help us see each other in a different way. And I think the more we understand one another, the harder it is to neglect or disrespect the other. That's really a big part of it. So we have those both in South Dakota, the Ocheti Essential Understanding, and in North Dakota, where we have the North Dakota Native American Essential Understanding.
Indeed. And Treopia, you went in and you've worked with these 2 fine souls on these essential understandings, and you made a realization that these essential understandings can be applicable back home in your community. Can you tell us about that revelation?
Well, Sharla and I think, have been working together over 15 years. And this is really the first year I have not traveled to South Dakota to be a part of what they're doing. And during the periods that that we worked together, and I later met Scott, and that was a thrill of my life. But we worked with the Lakota project, with the Lakota project. And at one point, I had the pleasure of serving on the board. And there was the Indian Education Conference in South Dakota. And I remember making a speech, and the title was From Little Rock to Pine Ridge, because there are so many similarities in the quest for not only equalization, but the quest to be heard, and the fact that the cultures have so much to teach us. In fact, it has been a real rare pleasure for me to have been a part of this. I take it as something that I could not pay for, just to work with Sharla and Scott and my other friends in South Dakota.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you, Treopia. Yes.
And You want to go ahead and read that comment?
I
right quick?
guess I need to because I don't want to, I think it's relevant to her speaking. Someone, Connie Godfrey, in the chat said, Treopia, I always love listening to your stories. I'm glad Scott and Sharla helped get this project from an idea, this beautiful finishing project. I'm so sorry to hear about your brother's passing. Stay well, and I look forward to seeing you again in South Dakota.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Connie.
All right, so bring it back from Little Rock to Pine Ridge. From Little Rock to Pine Ridge, how is that analogy relevant in what you're trying to do at the National Historic Site, Robin? She's on mute again.
We're gonna have to ask her.
All right, I can hear you guys. I can hear you. It's actually interesting because I too have been working with Lakota for the past maybe 10 years since I've been here in Little Rock and before. I've gone out a few times to Pine Ridge. I've gone out to, I think it's Rosebud. So I've gone out several times and never knew Treopia was doing it. So I think we was just missing each other. But first of all, it is good to share our cultures, and in doing that, there's the opportunity to break down some of the social and cultural barriers and the myths that we carry, but also looking at intergenerational opportunities with our elders. Because one of the projects that I used to do was with starting from preschool adolescents to middle school, high school, and on up to the adults and to our elders. And so we would go out to Salinas. We've gone out around several tribes, around reservations around New Mexico, and developing the Amos reservation, and developing partnerships where we were doing intergenerational programs. So how does that relate to Little Rock? Well, the thing is, we all have a history, and in sharing our narratives with each other, and that is how we break down those social and cultural barriers. Also, Scott was right. A lot of times you don't have Native American or people of color teachers. And so I was taking advantage of the opportunity to go in and to share our cultures with the white teachers and working with them and going to the next level and teaching our children. That was one of the projects that I was doing when I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I brought it on here with me to keep practicing because that was one of our best practices in sharing our cultures. The thing is, we're looking at oppression. You just might as well say we're looking at oppression. We're looking at society and how society dictate how we see each other. And we don't see each other in totality or see each other. They have different names for us. So we have to take all of that into consideration as to what we've been taught. And then we have to unlearn it and just have a clean slate. And that is the opportunity to share in working with our youth. I constantly say that the movement was built on the backs of our youth. And so when we are talking about the Little Rock Nine, when we're talking about Ruby Bridges, when we're talking about the Freedom Riders, we're sharing our cultures so they see us or they see themselves right in that story. And I think that is what's important, going from Little Rock to Pine Ridge, is that we all have a background, we all have stories. So how do we share those stories and dismantle those myths that have been taught to us, and taking advantage of the opportunity to unlearn, to relearn?
Absolutely.
That's it.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly about everything that was said, but the main thing is making sure that our youth are seeing us tell our stories and that we are taking control of that narrative that is being taught in our classrooms, um, so that they know that they can be advocates for this work, that they can understand where that root and that foundation comes from. Um, and so I absolutely agree with that. I want to talk quickly about action and outcome cycles, just really briefly. I know Scott, you you talked about that a lot, and is this your cycle? Is this something you
Yeah.
had? Can you talk a little bit about it?
Let me tell you how we came to that and some of the other graphics that we have. You know, as we talked about in with the indigenous elders, they had written essential understandings. Well, when we sat down to video interview the Green siblings, there were no Green siblings essential understandings. And so what we said is we've got to coalesce this. We've got to, what are they saying? What are the key points? And how do they fit together in this story in a way that people can not only understand about what happened in 1957, but say, what's happening right now? What are the patterns there that are happening here? And so that's really how a lot of that came to be. Us trying to make sense of it in a way that was consistent with what we were hearing from the elders of this project, which really were Treopia and Ernest and Scott and Robin. And so so that's where those things came from. And we have on the website, I'll mention that, greensiblingsproject.org. We have what we call our social justice workshop for educators, although it could be for anyone. And you know what you see in the video in the documentary is a very small portion of all of the interviews that we have from them. And we have all of these wonderful clips from all the people you've seen in the film tonight. And this social justice workshop is really designed around that, where we work through some of those concepts on the graphics by listening to certain segments from Ernest, from Treopia, from Robin, some from Scott, and then having discussions about those. Because that's one of the things that's important. It's great. There are lots of great books that have been written. It's great for me to sit down and learn. When I sit down at a table or virtually with a diverse group of people who are coming from different points of view, and we talk about some of these ideas, I grow 20 times more than if I was just taking in some information.
Yes. You want to go ahead and then I have a follow-up.
What I just wanted to say is, first and foremost, the graphics were excellent. Me being an educator, I'm like, whoa, how do I get my hands on this? And you talking about the social justice component of it. So I'm definitely in. Robin, we're going to have to talk later about this in this interview, but there's definitely going to be a partnership between APJMM and the historic site to take this film and a curriculum and actually build around it because it's excellent.
Well,
it's excellent.
The question is, I mean, before we start reinventing any wheels, is there a curriculum already in place for this film? And Scott, you mentioned coming to a table, sitting and having discussions, but classroom activities or lesson plans for.
I tell you what we'd like. What I'll say about that, the workshop it really is self-guided. A lot of it, I'll be really upfront about this because it's been really influential in our work. A lot of the ideas of how to do that in a circle come from the Center for Courage and Renewal, if you're familiar with that group. with Parker Palmer, and they're doing a whole lot of wonderful work right now in equity. But that's the model of engagement with others that we have utilized both with indigenous communities and in this project. And so I foresee this being a beginning place, especially in education. And I would love to work and partner with educators who are ready to make curriculum and ready to make lessons. We've done a lot of that in North Dakota or in South Dakota with the indigenous elders, and that needs to be done with this piece as well.
Right. And as the Coming to the Table Central Arkansas chapter of Coming to the Table, we definitely want to bring this work, and it's circle work for sure, to the table for conversations. But in classrooms, it's so important to have workshops or lesson plans for young people to just talk these things out, and especially talk out this action to outcomes cycle. We have a question,
For Treopia.
and it's for all of the panelists, but we'll ask Treopia to answer it first. From Kate Renchen. She says, for any of the panelists, has working with Indigenous people shed any surprising or unexpected light on your understanding of the African American experience and systemic racism?
Okay, you want me to respond to that first?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My feeling, and again, my first trip to South Dakota, I believe it was in 2001, was to a meeting that was held on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And it was my first and exciting experience having an opportunity to know people of a different culture. And I really think that, I guess the conclusion I came to at that time was that we don't know enough about other people whose lives are or experiences are different from ours. And then when we get to meet them, we realize that we all have some of the same aspirations, some of the same frustrations, some of the same impediments, and some of the same aspirations. So it's a case, I think, of people just getting to know people and understand people. I was thinking, too, one of the conferences that I attended in South Dakota, and I would go every year, we had a session after, I guess it was a speech that I made, and the audience was invited to ask any questions that they wanted to ask, and I promised to answer anything that was asked. But I think those kinds of opportunities that are provided for everybody helps us to become the people that we should become and that we aspire to become.
Yes, thank you so much. Sharla, did you want to? If you want me to reread this, I will. If you need me to.
Got the gist of it. And depression. Travel. Back. Are you hearing okay?
You're breaking up.
You're breaking up just a little bit.
This will be better if I get a little closer.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Sorry about that. So what I was
Hold on, Treopia, can you mute your phone for us, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now try.
Okay. All right. So what I was sharing is anytime that you're dealing with a group of people, when we're coming together and there's a group of people who has been under oppression for some reason, I feel like this story just shows up. This need to listen and need to hear from the elders and spend time growing an understanding of what the experience has been. Scott and I actually had an opportunity to present at a conference down in Jamaica, and there were people from all over the world there. And in our little session, we had people from, I think, almost every continent. And the thing that was in common was that there is systemic racism. There are problems that we need to be dealing with and we need to try to address. And so, yes, when we think about the indigenous population, as Scott and I have been learning by interviewing and spending time with and working with and trying to really listen to the stories, they are so similar to what we hear then from Robin. And, you know, sitting with Robin and hearing her story, especially her story of her life growing up and much of that.
There's a wonderful book written about it too.
We're reading it now.
Yes. And then listening to Treopia and to Scott and to Ernest, there was so much that was very similar. And what I felt like was sort of a underlying message in all of it is when you have maybe the face of the oppressor, I think our first job then is to listen. And if we can do that, we're going to get somewhere. But if we come with our defenses up, we're not going to get anywhere. And so coming with an open heart, an open mind, a desire to learn and to sit and, you know, depending on if you're coming from that dominant side or non-dominant side, that you, especially from the dominant side, listen.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I hear from you in that statement is the importance of situational awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be aware that, like you said, you have the face of the oppressor. So therefore, you have to approach the situation a little bit differently than you normally would, especially in 2021.
Right.
One thing that Robin said in the film that really stood out to me, it reverberated when she said it. She talked about we're constantly blowing ourselves up because we are neglecting either intentionally or unintentionally this situational awareness. Can you speak on that, Robin?
Sure. First, I have to share with you, I have 5 grandchildren that are Southern youth that are Lakota and Cheyenne. So I raised my children up on the reservations. They were raised in that manner. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, I worked with the 5 Sandoval Indian Pueblos, created curriculum guides, teachers' guides. But one of the things I learned and going out and talking with our youth is that there was a disconnect, not only with the educators, but there was a disconnect with our youth from their own culture. So how do we empower them? How do we instill pride? How do we tell them how significant they are? So a few years back, we were working on our park film, and we reached out to Pine Ridge. And at first, they were very doubtful to work with us because of the past interview with Diane Sawyer and how they were perceived as negative alcoholics, all the negative side. So we told them, but this is your opportunity to shine and let people know who you are. I think that is very important, and instilling pride, but listening to them as well, their doubt, their fears. And right now, I know there's an suicide rate. on the reservations, not only with our youth, but, you know, with families, with the females. There's so much going on when they are disconnected from us or from their culture. So how do we bring them back into that circle, into that fold, whereas they are believing in themselves, that they are supporting each other? One of the projects that, or activities or elements, is listening to them as to how you can help them empower themselves, help them and finding the resources that they need, revisiting not only their culture, but their language, revisiting the traditions. And I think all of that is very important. We fail to see each other as who we are. And I say this because in my growing up, I had to deny my culture, being Gullah Geechee. That was a no-no, so you eat it. I can hide much with the way I talk, but there are things that, but sometimes you can't hide because you're in plain sight. So what is our responsibility in working with our neighbors? What is our responsibility to bringing them back into the fold and following them and learning from them and sitting, being still and immersing ourselves with what they have to offer? Mm-hmm. We tend to judge too quickly. We tend to assess things very wrongly. We think we know everything, and we're making mistake after mistake after mistake. And in that, we're falling behind instead of staying in step with our neighbors and learning that whether you are Navajo, whether you are Opi, whether you are Havasupai, we are connected. What impacts you impacts me, because we are interdependent and we don't recognize that until it's too late. I'm gonna say the last thing and then I'll be quiet and let someone else talk. When I moved to Grand Canyon, and it was in 98, 99, I moved to Grand Canyon. And the Havasupai, this was their own, the Grand Canyon. It was the Opi's own, and Navajo, all of that was theirs. And now, you know, it's the government, right? Grand Canyon National Park. Well, down in the canyon, some miles from there is where the Havasupai lives. But they, I would say the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs and the government, they gave them a small space about big as my living room for some that wanted to live up on the rim. They didn't have windows. They didn't have bathrooms. I was so shocked when I went to visit, and I was so angry, and I challenged my employers. I challenged them as to why are we allowing them to live like that? And so we pulled together people in the community, got things donated, and we went out and put roofs on, put windows in, and built an area for, which I wasn't happy with that, but this is the best we could get, built an area for them to go for the restrooms and to take showers. They had none of that. So we have a responsibility to each other. That is so important, to see each other in totality. And when you see someone hurt, when you see someone down, you pick them up. You don't keep them down there. So when we ignore what's going on, we are blowing ourselves up. When we talk about the degradation of segregation, we're blowing ourselves up when we participate in that. And so I challenged myself in knowing that this is where I was going to be for a couple of years. And I challenged people. I got in their face and made them feel guilty. I didn't care, but we went out there and we took care of them. And I never want to see anything like that again. It is very painful. And everyone was okay with it until I put them to shame. And that's what we have to do. We have to put people to shame. We have to wake them up. All right, that's enough for me.
Oh, that's no problem. And just want to let everyone know this is an open dialogue. So everybody can talk to each other and ask each other questions. You don't have to wait for Clarice and I to ask a question. You could definitely jump in if you hear Robin saying something, because I saw Scott a couple of times wanting to.
Yes, I seen it.
I do. I want to, Robin always makes me think. Robin, actually, I just say this, Robin, you inspire me.
Thank you.
You inspire me. But let me just say this. What I was thinking as Robin was talking and connected with the question before as well. We haven't really talked about privilege. We talk about privilege in that, and privilege, like we said, comes in a lot of different flavors. But what it primarily does is it makes us blind to things because everything's running smoothly for me. And here's the challenge that we have right now today. Most folks with privilege don't believe privilege is a thing because they have privilege and they can't see it.
Yeah.
So here's a perfect example from our indigenous history, okay, that connects in with, I think, culture, people of color across the board. So you take a people who have a culture that works, it fits together beautifully, okay? In the mid 1800s, you have immigrants coming in and the U.S. government coming in. You wipe out the buffalo. You take up all of the farmland. You fundamentally change the environment. And then you stand back and you say, see, your way of life doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work anymore because the environment, all the key load-bearing walls have been destroyed by this incoming influx. And so now it doesn't work anymore. That's exactly the same as structural racism. What happens is we shape the environment, the social environment, the economic environment, everything else. We shape it in a way that works for me, okay? And then we stand back and say, wow, if you people weren't so lazy, you'd have a little more money. Wow, if you folks would do a little more work, you'd be this. Or if you weren't so lazy, you'd be that, or whatever. Because we say, see, your culture doesn't work. But what's happened is we're blind to the ways that we have shaped everything around so that this works over here. But this didn't work from day one because it's in the middle of this systemic toxicity. And if you have privilege in whatever shape that is, it is really hard to see that because you wake up in the morning and you say, wow, life is good. I know how to run things. Things go well for me. I don't know what people are complaining about. And I think that's our key problem. Those two things together, the privilege and that systemic racism, the systemic, it's not just racism, it's systemic inequity across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I wanna respond to, is he still talking? Sorry, what did I do?
Go ahead, just talk.
I'm sorry. I something popped up. I'm not sure what happened. I wanted to scroll down. How do I scroll down here to voice some of the comments that are going on in the chat? No, it was somebody was saying amen to you.
Reverend C.
Reverend C. Irwin said, yes, Scott. Kate Renchen said, thank you, Robin. I love your comments about culture and connection. Yes, we are indeed all one, as the virus has shown us if we didn't know it before. And I just wanted to get some of those comments out because I think that's important. Did you have a question before I actually pose the challenge? Because we've been talking about challenges.
Well, I do. I
Go
definitely
ahead.
have a question
Go ahead.
because Robin brought up something that I definitely want to bring in Treopia
Yes.
to talk about. Robin talked a very succinct statement. What impacts me impacts you.
Mhm.
And Treopia, you talked in the film, and you mentioned it a couple of times, how the story of you and your siblings is a story that is extremely relevant. And I believe one of you even said how, no, I think that was Scott. One of you said how your friend talked to you about how important telling your story is. So I want you to take a moment to talk about how this systemic racism, this systemic privilege impacted you and your younger brothers as far as how that the story of that impact can help people today hearing that story and how it impacts them.
Well, thank you for asking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because Ernest has been trying to get in, and he has not been successful. So I am trying to call him on my cell phone so that he can say at least hello, and I'll answer your question.
Love that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Here's Ernest. I'm holding you up to my microphone.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry.
Oh, we can't hear him.
They can't hear you.
Does he
No.
have the same number? Can you give him the same number that you used to dial in?
I did. I gave him, yes. Well, okay, we'll try, but let me respond to your question, and I think you were referring to the statement that I one of the statements that I made, and I hope I'm remembering the right one. But I think to sum it up, I mentioned I know at one time that our parents had us to believe, reared us rather to believe that you are no less than anyone, you are no better than anyone, but you are as good as anyone that you can think of. So I don't know if that responds to your question. I might have to ask you to ask it again.
Well, that's definitely along the lines. The what I want you to speak on is this piece of history specifically impacted you and your younger brothers. It impacted all three of you in a different way. And I want to give you an opportunity because you talked about how the story, those three separate stories that are intertwined, how it's important for the young people today to hear what you guys as young people went through, because particularly Scott, when he talked about how he felt about seeing his older brother leave the house every morning with a Jeep with a machine gun in the front and a Jeep and a machine gun in the back, I saw on his face that he still hadn't settled that and healed from that.
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, Scott and I would, of course, he lived in New York, and I'm in the Baltimore area, and we would visit by phone every Sunday. And I learned things in later years, in fact, up until the time that he passed last year, that I didn't realize. And I think you have so correctly surmised that his experiences really literally embittered him. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think that helped him to do the kinds of things that he did for equality and equity in the labor union that he eventually became a part of. But going back to the days in Little Rock, there are things that I wish I could have asked him, because I really felt, again, that he bore the brunt of some of the less happy times and statements that were made when Ernest was a student. But again, he was extremely supportive of him and always remained supportive. But those experiences, and as you alluded to a few minutes ago, we were all in different places. I being, and I have to admit now, I am the elder of the three of us. Ernest says that I don't admit it readily, but I am now, so I'm confessing.
We got it on tape.
but I grew up in total segregation. But again, I think I've mentioned several times in the videos, we never felt denied. We knew what the rules were, and that was our community, our parents, our churches supported everything that they expected of us, expected us to become. And it was a wonderful time growing up in Little Rock. And of course, Ernest and Scott came along later, but when Ernest was going to Central, and of course, again, Scott was the one who was part of the lost class because the governor closed all the schools after Ernest graduated. But with all those experiences, I have to say, I think they made us stronger. Mm-hmm. We certainly would not hope for those kinds of things, but they happened. And as my mother used to say, you take advantage of opportunities to expand your horizons, and that's what I think we have tried to do.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
We just sent.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We just sent Mr. Ernest Green a email with the link again, so that he can join us. We really hate that he is not on this particular on a Zoom call with us, because we would be honored to have him speaking with you about the your siblings project and how important it is just to hear his voice again, talk about his experience and what we should be doing, and how young people can, really galvanize and become involved in the actions that need to happen.
So Treopia, please let them know that we just re-emailed him the information to get on the call.
Okay, I have him on the phone now.
Okay.
Wait a minute. They just emailed you the link. Okay, he's going to try to get the information, and he'll try to call back. But anyway, is there was there another question that you had while we were waiting for him?
Go ahead.
There's one specific question for Scott, actually, Treopia, that Kate Renchen had asked here in the chat.
Yes.
Did you want to ask Treopia and expound on anything?
No, she's talking about
Kate
her
asked,
brother, not this Scott.
No. Let me see. It says, what an inspiration from Scott to turn his pain and bitterness into work for a more just world. She is talking about.
I'm sorry. What? Would you repeat that, please?
Yes, ma'am. It's not a question. I apologize. It's actual statement. Kate made a statement about Scott. She said, what an inspiration from Scott to turn his pain and bitterness into work for a more just world. He is a good soul. May he rest in peace.
Thank you very much. That's beautiful. Well, it's very true because when he became a member of the union, Union 28, Sheet Metal Workers Union in New York, I remember he said that he joined because he learned that there were no Black members, and he was curious to know why. And as a result, he encouraged other Black workers to become members. He also, one of the things that kind of surprised me, one of his friends was a teacher in New Jersey, and he would often go over and speak to the students, which I think was a fantastic thing because he was able to give them a perspective of growing up that nobody else could. But he was, Scott was always one that was interested in the rights of others. And I remember we would talk about South Dakota. He was stationed in, it was in Montana or North Dakota. And we talked about the indigenous people and the kinds of things that they were suffering through and had suffered through all of their lives, really. But he cared about people, and that's the way he lived.
One thing I really liked about the film, and I even pulled Clarice to the side, and I said that it seems like Scott is the Malcolm X of your family, and Ernest is the Martin Luther King of your families.
True. That's an excellent analysis.
Be great if you could share about how Scott continues to make an impact even after death, with the most recent New York Times article and some of the things that you've been talking with the journalist about.
That would be great.
Well, yes. In fact, there was an article in Times. I think I don't know if you saw it or had an opportunity to see it, but 2 weeks ago, and it had to do with the burial place where Scott is, which before the pandemic had been a burial place, a public place for prisoners. But because so many people in New York suffered from coronavirus and so many died at one time, this burial ground had to be converted. And there's a committee working with the city of New York to turn it into a national burial park. And the committee that's working for this decided to highlight Scott. And New York Times carried an article 2 weeks ago, 2 Fridays ago, that talked about him and the work that he had done in New York and what he had done to work toward equality and equity, particularly in the labor unions. So we were quite proud. And of course, the emphasis was the fact that when he passed, the situation was so dire in New York that, of course, we couldn't visit. We couldn't even find a funeral home because they were so packed and the waiting list was so long. So you had to do what you had to do. But actually, that has now turned out to become a positive. Many times, the most negative things turn out to be the most positive. So we're proud that that his demise was emphasized in that way, and that people really have begun to understand the seriousness of this pandemic and recognize what Scott has been able to contribute.
Absolutely. Thank you so very
Yes.
much. That was so
I
wonderful.
put the link to that article in the chat there.
Yes.
Yes,
See
and
that?
I'm going to take that link and put it in the OV chat.
Yeah.
Oh, great, great, great.
There we go.
So they can read it.
Great. Let's go in. Do you have anything that you want to ask?
Well, I do, but
Go ahead.
I'm hoping when I start asking this question that Mr.
Get
Green
Hope he
will
can
pop
finally
up.
pop on.
Yes, on the Zoom with us.
Because
For
we have
me,
about 15 minutes left.
my last question would be, unless our audience who's joining us have any more questions, and if you do, please put them in the chat. Scott, you mentioned you were talking about privilege and blindness, and also you know, we talked to many white communities, and the thing that we're asked by a lot of them is, how can we, what can we do?
And
And a lot of the things, some of the things, I know a few. For me, the main one that I talk about is using that privilege that you now understand that you have to make a difference, to challenge the system of supremacy, to use your voice in that privilege to challenge legislation, to, speak truth to those who have power to do things, and be the bridge. And so
Be the
what
bridge. I like
what
that.
is what challenges,
can you
positive
hear?
challenge, can you all give to white communities that are saying, what can we do? Like, what we now recognize our privilege, like we're not blind to it anymore. What steps can we take?
That's a really good question, because I think there are certain things that people who fall into those categories of privilege are able to do, especially when we're talking about an audience that is privileged. And I'll go back briefly to our work in South Dakota and North Dakota. We knew that going into schools, we were not culture experts. We were pointing to the elders who were, but we also knew, when a white teacher has a wonderful indigenous elder come in and present in the classroom, they say, wow, that's wonderful. Let's make sure we invite him back sometime again. But what happens is it doesn't actually change the fundamentals of what's happening in the classroom, because they think that's not what I can do. That's like a visitor coming in, a special guest or something. When Sharla and I go in and we work with non-Indigenous teachers and we model for them, here's a way that you could bring this cultural piece in a respectful way. Here's a way that you could do this. Suddenly they begin to realize, oh, if Scott and Sharla can do that, I guess I could do that too. It's the same thing with advocacy. If a white community or a community of any sort is having difficulty seeing or listening to and recognizing the real inequities that are existing for others because they're blind to it. It takes someone of privilege to say, no, look, here's what you're not seeing, because I'm seeing it now. And let me tell you how I came to see it. And to be, so that's one thing that I think we can do. And it does have to do with advocacy in the seats of power, you know, whether you're talking about advocacy at the governmental level, at the community level, but also just in the neighbor level. I mean, if I've got neighbors who are just making statements that make it clear that they don't think their own privilege is a thing, they don't think inequity is a thing, then I've got to find a way to help them begin to see that, or at least move in that direction.
Thank you, Scott. Sharla, did you want to add to that?
I think I would just add that, you know, the more we can try to eliminate those barriers, you know, one of the things when you just come at this straight on, head on, and you say, you know, we are people with privilege, we, you know, it creates a division. And so what we have found, and it's why Scott brought this up earlier, using that way of being together that is designed by the Center for Courage and Renewal and Parker Palmer, of coming together on creating safe and brave space where we can talk about things, knowing that it's going to be challenging at times. When we can do that, and each person comes bringing their full self, whatever their experience has been, it currently is, whatever that is, it is welcome here. And when we can come into that space and have conversations in that space, transformation will happen. And so I think it's about showing up, and it's about being ready to talk and to address these things as you notice them. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. The more we can have that being in ourselves, so when that opportunity for the neighbor conversation comes up, then I'm ready to talk about it no matter where they are. You know, if they are completely opposite from me, I still need to be able to talk with them about it in a way that doesn't make them feel judged or put up a huge barrier that's going to prevent us from ever connecting. So I think we need to be very aware of ourselves and do a lot of reflection and know where our little trigger points and things are, so that when we are in a place where we have that opportunity, we take advantage and we do what we can in that moment.
Thank you, Sharla.
Treopia, is there a question that we have not asked yet that you would like to answer?
I have enjoyed this discussion, really just listening. And I got Ernest again, and I told him I would ask if there was any specific question addressed to him, and I would call him and I would translate his response to you.
So the specific question for Mr. Green?
Because, you know, I think BIPOC folks can chime in on the privilege question. You know, and privilege comes in different levels too. So, you know, using our privilege and also looking at white privilege and then using our own privilege. What is it? What can we do to change on the there was that tree trunk, that tree ring that I saw that was beautiful. It was individual, family, community, and humanity. Those 4 levels there, you know, Scott, Sharla, you guys answered those very, you know, really in detail and in an amazing way. Treopia, did you want to answer that question? Like how can you use those on an individual level, on a family level, on a community level, and humanity level? Because we know our families are, when we talk about that, they're the hardest, uh, they're the hardest to kind of get to change when it comes to things, because we have that familiarity that we have with our families, that it's harder to change hearts and minds with them because they think that they know who you are. And they do, but then when you make a change, they feel like you're still the same person. So you can answer any of or all of that.
Well, again, I was trying to think as you were phrasing that. I think it's important, and I've mentioned this when I've spoken particularly to groups of young people. It's really important to understand that, number one, of course, you're okay, but there are many things that you can learn from other people. And I think once that concept is internalized, that even though you're okay, you're not the end all.
Mm-hmm.
And that by becoming acquainted with other people, and I remember once, again, my mother, who was, of course, the great philosopher, my mother said, and we were talking about some racial issues or something, and she said, you're going to find people of all races, some that you like better than others. So it's not a matter of a person's race instigating this, but people are different. And again, you'll find some that you like better than others in all races. So I think it's just important to understand that because you do something one way doesn't mean that you are 100% right all the time. I use an example. I went to Australia several years ago, and I was had a chance to go to the shopping district. And I was walking down the street, and I kept bumping into people. And I said to myself, well, I must be doing something wrong. So I stood back and I watched. And in observing people, I realized that in Australia, people move from the left, whereas here, we generally move from the right. And it just made me think at that moment, just because I do something one way doesn't mean that it's right all the time, that people have different ways of doing things, and for them at that particular time, it's okay. So I think that's what we have to realize, that we are, number one, we are okay, but there are other people that do things differently, and we have to try to understand why and how. If there's something that we feel needs to be changed, it's important to look at what their experiences are and help them to understand that there are other ways of doing something. I admired Scott and Sharla all the time with the work they're doing with the Lakota tribe in South Dakota. And it really epitomizes the philosophy that people who have had different experiences, life experiences, and who live in a different way have much to offer, and that you can learn and can find ways, if necessary, to help them to achieve whatever their goals are. And I think that's what life is all about.
Yes.
Scott,
Really,
Sharla, you want to respond?
I wanted to say it really speaks to that cultural competency that you're talking about, Treopia, and how important it is to to be aware and have that in mind whenever you're approaching, like Sharla and Scott was talking about, and Robin, when you're approaching communities, being competent about those communities and seeking to understand what you don't know before you reach that community, and also what you can know on a personal level about the people and individually, is so important. Um, was Mr. Green able to get, are you able to get him that question or?
Oh, well, here's the thing about us not being able to get Mr. Green on. Robin has asked that we re-screen this film next month in March, and we have this discussion again in March. So what I would like to do with Treopia, Ernest, Scott, Sharla, and Robin, let's get our calendars together to find out when is the best time in March for us to go ahead and schedule it now and start putting the word out so that we can have part 2 of this amazing conversation.
And make sure that he is on the call. So that
Where is he at? I'm going to, wherever he's at, I'm going to drive and make sure he's on.
We'll get him in there 30 or minutes or more before we get started.
All right, so.
Well, Ernest is listening. I have my cell phone up to the speaker in my phone, so he hears what you are saying.
Thank you so much, Mr. Green, Ernest Green. We love you. We appreciate you, and Treopia and Scott and your family. We're just very honored to have you with us.
Go ahead, Treopia, and let him know about my observation of him and his younger brother being the Malcolm and the Martin of the family. I would like to get a response.
Ernest. Well, no. The point was he was saying that you are the Dr. King of the family, and Scott was the Malcolm X, and wanted to know what your response is. He says you were right on, spot on.
I thought so. And will you ask him, does he have a question for Scott, Sharla, or Robin at this time?
Did you hear that? Well, I think I have to share this with you. He said he wanted to thank Scott and Sharla for all their support, but he also wanted you to know that he was at Michigan State with Malcolm X's brother.
All right.
And he said they used to go to Lansing to hear Malcolm X preach. So he's saying that not only did Dr. King come to his graduation, but he also had a relationship with Malcolm X.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Robin, do you have a question for Scott, Sharla, Treopia, or Ernest?
Or a statement.
No, but I would like for either one of them to share how this came about as far as the grants with the National Park Service. And I would like for them to share that.
I can start, and Scott, you can help me if I details. So the National Park Service had an opportunity for kind of project that would do historical preservation. And with the Central High School being a national park, it seemed like the very perfect opportunity to create something that would be another part of the story being told, that could maybe, link with with the museum and the center there at Central High School that Robin runs. And it's just, I felt like it was just the perfect intersection of everything. We'd been working with Treopia to try to figure out how to do this. We interviewed Robin and talked with Ernest. We hadn't talked to Scott at that point yet, but then found out we got some funding, and our organization, Technology, Innovation, and Education, was able to match funds that were received through that, so that we would be able to get all of it. And I am just so thankful that we were able to do that, especially with Scott, not this past summer, but the summer before. Otherwise, you know, we would have missed out. We would have lost that, his story. His story is
timely, very timely.
Yeah.
Okay, can I piggyback? I'm with Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site with the National Park Service under the Department of Interior. The school is run by Little Rock School District. So it's two separate entities, but we, before President Barack left office, he set aside millions and millions of dollars for historic preservation and civil rights sites. And so Treopia came up with this great idea. They was working on it, and they wrote the grants. I couldn't write the grants, but I could advise them or be a consultant, but I could not write the grant. So we worked together like that, and just made sure this happened. And I need people to understand that Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site belongs to the community. We are there to serve the community. And talking about servant leadership, that's our responsibility, to serve the community. And we have to work with both advocates and adversaries.
Yes.
And the site is there for people to share their narratives with each other and for people to learn about each other. And that is the way to break down those social and cultural barriers. And even with that, it's important for people to realize that this is just the beginning of what we can do if we all work together. It's just so much that we can do. And looking at how our needs are the same, but our experiences are different. So we all come from a place of history. We all have a story, all have a background. And in sharing that with each other, that's how we move into that space of humanity and having empathy for each other and compassion.
Thank you. Now, we have several people in the chat that are really excited that this film is going to be rescreened in March, but there's a question of when in March. Can we look at our calendars right now so we can answer that question? Yeah, we want to do that. Treopia, can you ask Ernest what his availability is in March?
Ernest?
Where's my calendar?
He said, you select the date, said he's sure the virus won't be completely gone, but he'll try to work around it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about that? Scott, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, March, we've got some availability in March.
So how about that week of the 21st, so that'll give us enough time to really promote it and work on it and drive the audience toward us. So
Okay.
how about the week of the 21st?
Sharla,
Okay.
does that look good on yours?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks good on mine.
All right. Well, we will be rescreening this on the week of March 21st, and we will make sure that Mr. Ernest Green is on the call and is able to participate and we will continue this part 2. So
Yes,
right now we're going to put an end to this. Can you put a period on this sentence, baby?
a pen.
Yeah. Put a pin in the.
Oh, just wanting to really just thank everyone once again. Treopia, Ernest, Scott, the siblings, the family. Thank you guys again for sharing your story and your life and your advocacy and your work and just everything with us. We're so grateful. Thank you so much to Sharla, Steever, and Scott Simpson for your work with Native Indigenous peoples.
And
And
can I say something on this? Thank you right
Please
here.
go ahead.
I want to, Treopia said something to me today, and she told me how honored she was to work with you, Scott and Sharla, because it gave her an opportunity to see and have film of her brother before he passed away. So I wanted to speak that into existence. And Treopia, if you want to add to that, you could definitely can.
Yeah, that was so important because Sharla and Scott insisted on my brother Scott being involved in this project. They arranged for him to travel from New York to Baltimore to my house, and they flew out here, and we had a wonderful day, all of us together. And that was the last time that I saw my brother alive. So had it not been for them, that might not have happened. So we are just very grateful. And I'd like to thank you for hosting this. This was a wonderful opportunity, I think, for people to get together and talk. Some of my favorite people, of course, my brother Ernest, who is blinking on the phone, on my cell phone that I'm holding, and Sharla and Scott. And again, we are very close. We work together, and again, this is the first time I have not visited South Dakota because of the virus. So that leaves a hole in my heart, but we'll make up for it at some point. So thank you again, all of Little Rock, for doing this. This is wonderful.
Thank you all too.
Thank
And
you.
last but never least, Superintendent Robin White, we thank you so very, very much for everything that you do. Thank you for being here in Little Rock, because we know you could be anywhere else in the world.
With that resume that she
Right,
has.
you could be anywhere else in the world, but we have you with us. You are a treasure to this state, and you have to know that. And we just really appreciate the Little Rock Central High School National Park Service and just your leadership. And thank you for being a partner with us in this very important work. We appreciate you and we honor you as well, and want to continue creating these platforms. We talk about, actions and what we need to do and how we can keep pushing things forward, but having these conversations, these dialogues, and watching very important documentaries about our history and the way forward is really very important. And so thank you all very much. We look forward to part 2 of this conversation. And I'm really going to try to push some young people this way, and maybe we can talk to some teachers to see if they can get some extra credit or something.
Yeah, because that'll be during spring break.
Yeah,
so.
to get them to be a part of this documentary and this conversation. So thank you so much.
And I have a message. Ernest just said, thank you for everything, and he'll see you in March.
Absolutely.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Right. Good night.
Good night.